Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to a brand new video on the channel. Inside of today's video, we're going to be ranking all gears in the game right now, from the very worst all the way up to the very best, to help you guys decide what you need to buy inside of Brawl Stars. Of course, some of the gears, especially the mythic ones, are really expensive. So of course, before we jump into it, make sure you're subscribed if you're not already. Getting close to 300k subscribers. Come on, hit the subscribe button. Go. Right, without further ado, let's jump into it then. So we're going to be starting off in the D tier, because I don't actually think there's an F tier gear in the game right now. I used to think Sandy's was an F tier, but I know we'll talk about that a little bit later on. But we're going to be starting off with Enduring Toxins with Crow. So whenever you use this mythic gear, the poison damage is increased by 30%. So essentially, all it does is increase the damage by an extra 160 damage per poison attack, which essentially means Crow gets an extra poison tick worth of damage. But that really doesn't do anything with Crow. With Crow, you don't really use him for the damage or anything like that. So the mythic gear doesn't really help him out. Although I use the mythic gear a lot with Crow, I don't notice the difference. So for me, you may as well just go other gears where you can still get value with Crow. So next up in D tier, we have pet power. So pets are increased in power by 25%. That sounds good by the description, but all it does is it increases the damage by pets by 25%. That's all it does. It's really good in heist for Nita with Bruce and Jesse's turret, for example. But at the same time, it's like very rare, especially against good players, that those types of supers are going to get onto the safe. Also, it doesn't increase their HP or anything like that. I think if it increased the HP of the turret and Nita's bear, for example, then it actually would be a decent gear, but still, it's really underwhelming. Next up in the D tier, we have Amber's mythic gear called Sticky Oil. Whenever you throw Amber's oil, the opponents will go over it and they'll be slowed by 10%. So that sounds really strong. This actually got emergency nerf when first released, because 20% was actually a little bit toxic, but 10% is literally not noticeable at all. And also, the way you play Amber anyways, like, people just won't step on the oil because they don't want to get burned, and they won't want to get slowed as well. So you won't really see the effect of this. I think the only time it's actually useful is when you don't actually want to set your super on fire, which is hardly ever. Maybe in like Flare and Phoenix on Knockout, maybe in a few hot zone scenarios, but then sometimes you might accidentally just light it on fire anyways. I just don't really see much point in the mythic gear. And lastly in the D tier, we have Sandy's mythic gear. So whenever an opponent is within a sandstorm, they deal 20% less damage. So this was F tier, but then the recent hypercharge came out, and the way that you play Sandy right now is that you actually use your sandstorm a lot more aggressively. The problem is that you don't really want to swap away from speed and damage with Sandy, so you don't really find yourself using the mythic gear too much. Maybe on a more open map you might want to use this, but yeah, you use that sandstorm, especially the hypercharge one, really aggressively, so you actually get a lot more value with this mythic gear. So now moving on to the C tier, these are gears that are good most of the time, but I'd say that you'd rather just pick another gear in that slot. I know you want to experiment a lot of the time, but I would say that Quadruplets is in the C tier. It's actually one I use pretty much all the time with Eve, so maybe you could bump it up a rating. But at the same time, I don't really notice it every single time. Like, it's not going to be the difference maker in games. It's just good to have because other gears aren't really the best with Eve. It spawns an extra hatchling, which can waste opponents' ammo, but at the same time, you don't really use Eve for her super. You just use her for the ability to go over water. So I don't think the mythic gear is really that needed. Next up in the C tier, we have Leon's mythic gear called Lingering Smoke. So for an extra 2 seconds, you get to use your super form when you use its mythic gear, which sounds pretty good, but of course you don't really see too much value with this mythic gear unless you're using the hypercharge at the same time. It used to be a really good combination, but you actually get just less supers with Leon in general. It can pair really well with smoke trails, for example, but at the same time, because Leon really sucks in the meta, you probably rather just use like damage and shield gear, because it's pretty hard for him to even get a super. So yeah, this mythic gear is not as good as it used to be. Lastly in the C tier, we have Tick's mythic gear. So whenever you use your head, it has an extra 1000 HP, which is pretty decent, but at the same time, it's not like a big difference maker. When this was first released, it used to be really strong, and then Brawlers got upgraded in terms of the HP and damage with the Power 11 changes, and it just made this mythic gear slightly weaker. It's a little bit easier to take out, but it's still a decent gear with Tick. I use it pretty much all the time. So now moving on to the B tier. So these are gears that are used pretty often, especially with certain Brawlers. It's a must use a lot of the time. I'm going to start off with the health gear. So the health gear, it allows you to recover health 50% more effectively. So essentially, the higher the HP the brawler has, the more effective that they can recover their HP. So this is why health gear is really good on tanks like Frank, just any big beefy boy. You're going to get a lot of value out of the health gear, and it's actually pretty underrated a lot of the time. Everyone agrees with me in the comment section most of the time whenever I talk about the health gear, but I've been starting to use it on a lot of different brawlers like Max, like 8-bit for example. Even though 8-bit's a damage dealer, I just love using it on him. There's just so many scenarios where health gear is super useful because it allows you just to get back into the action a couple of seconds quicker. So next up in the B tier, we have the vision gear. Again, I could easily put this in the A tier, but because a lot of time it's situational, other gears probably are better, but vision gear is so broken on grassy maps. I just can't recommend it enough. People still underrate this gear, but there's so many brawlers in the game that just elevate because of this vision gear. Think of Jean for example, you've got Pam, you've got Lola, you've got so many brawlers that can scout where the vision gear is just so essential, and especially because of these hypercharged tanks in the grass, you need the vision gear to scout them. So I think it's just essential on grassy maps. So next up in the B tier, we have the shield gear. Now this is essential on any passive game mode like bounty and knockout. Giving yourself an extra 900 HP can really change some interactions as well. Of course, it's really valuable on the squishier brawlers in the game. It's actually pretty valuable on a lot of assassins, and it's just pretty valuable if you want to go really aggressive and you have that type of playstyle, you know, like Max for example, or just any aggressive brawler. It can help you out in a lot of different situations, and with certain brawlers as well. Say if you're facing a tough matchup, you might just want to put the shield gear on, because that might be the difference between you actually getting your super and not. You know, for example, I've seen people use shield gear on brawlers like Nita and Sandy even, just because it allows you to get closer and get that super. So shield gear, pretty underrated. And finally, the B tier is going to be the mythic gear with Mortis. So this increases the bat speed by 50%. To begin with, I thought this mythic gear was absolutely pointless, and so did like 99% of the community, but after trying it a lot, I don't know if it's because I'm just a bad Mortis player, but it really does elevate my gameplay even more. Again, maybe with the good Mortis players you don't need this mythic gear, but essentially the way you got to look at it right is that if you can fire off your super quicker, you're going to be healing up quicker, you're going to be cycling back to your bats quicker. That's the way I see it, and especially if you don't have like zero ping like a lot of people that don't live in Germany or wherever you are close to the service near your region, it's going to help you a lot with Mortis. So make sure to try it out. I think it's pretty good. So now we're going to be moving into the A tier gears. So these are pretty much useful everywhere, or they'll just completely change the way that a brawler plays at least. And we're going to be starting off with the damage gears. So whenever you're below 50% HP, you get an extra 15% damage with your brawler. Of course, that's just pretty good overall, especially if you're weak. It's going to help you out in a lot of 1v1 interactions. It's really going to help you out on low damage brawler. High damage brawlers is always going to be useful. You can never go wrong with going to damage gear on your brawler. It's not map dependent, it's not mode dependent, etc. You can always get value with it. So next up in the A tier, we have the speed gear. So this was absolutely the best gear in the game, and then the speed got reduced from 20% to 15% just off the back of, I think, Worlds last year. Ever since then, it's still a good gear. Of course, on grassy maps it's definitely needed, and there's a lot of brawlers which you really need it on, like Sandy, Ems, tanks, etc. But at the same time, I'm seeing a lot of people actually kind of go away from the speed gear and competitive play, but it's still a really good one, and I recommend getting it on those brawlers that you play a lot of time on grassy maps. So next up in the A tier, we have the supercharger gear. So I know there's a couple of brawlers which is just absolutely useless on, like Jackie for example, but then there's some brawlers which you absolutely need this gear on, like Sprout, like Lou, like Bonnie for example. There's a couple more as well which you need it on, like Edgar, and it just elevates their game even more. So, you know, literally with Sprout it takes 5 shots without it, and it's 4 with the supercharge. With Bonnie it's supposed to take 4 shots and now 3. It just allows brawlers to just cycle through supers a lot quicker, and I think without it a lot of those brawlers would suck. And lastly, in the A tier, we have the reload speedy gear. So I use this pretty much on every single brawler that I can. There's brawlers like Rico, Bo, Brock, even the really fast ones, like I said, like Rico. I use the reload speed gear on because you reload 15% faster. Doesn't sound like a lot, but even for a spammy brawler like Rico, just means you're able to spam even more so. Of course, being able to shoot more frequently just means you're going to be able to put out more damage, and even if you've got bad aim, you're probably going to be able to like work around that because you just got constant ammo. You've got brawlers like Colt as well, Bell, 8-bit. There's just so many high damage brawlers where the reload speed gears just increases your DPS anymore, so it's just a no-brainer. So now we're going to move on to the S tier. So the gears in this tier you just need to use every single time. I'm going to be starting off with the gadget charge gear. So you get an extra use of your gadget with this gear. This recently kind of got introduced, and it's such a strong gear to have. So just think of every brawler that has a strong gadget, you can use the gadget charge gear every single time. So think of Spider's gadget with Charlie, for example. Think of Buster's pull. Think of Gray's walking cane. Think of Lou's freeze gadget. Think of Max's dash. There's just so many gadgets that you could go through where an extra gadget would be able to confer confirm like an extra kill. You know, Piper's gadget, banana gadget, you can confirm a kill with it. There's just so many instances where the gadget charge gear is essential to a brawler's success. So next up in the S tier, we have Pam's mythic gear called Super Turret. So whenever you use your super, it will heal you for 20% more than it should. So it's around 960, I think, without the mythic gear, and it boosts it to like 1.1. So the reason why this is so strong is because you use Pam on game modes like Hot Zone, where you just want to stay alive for as long as possible. So a lot of people, there's a lot of really cheesy matchups. For example, like in Hot Zone, a really popular matchup is like Pam versus Stu. But Stu physically won't have enough ammo to even kill the Pam a lot of the times if she just sits in this turret with the mythic gear. So I think it's essential for Pam. So next up in the S tier, we have Jean's mythic gear called Talk to the Hand. So it doesn't say in the description how much it actually increases the pull range by, but I believe it's somewhere around 33%, right? But who doesn't want a longer Jean pull? Jean's pull is one of the best supers inside of a game. Effectively, you give yourself more chances to pull the enemy gem carrier, more chances just to pull other tanks. This mythic gear is essential. It's easily one of the best in the game. And lastly, in the S tier, we have Spike's mythic gear called Sticky Spikes. Whenever you throw out your super, the slow will be 30% more effective. This used to be 50%. And it was absolutely broken, and it's 30% now, and it's still pretty broken. It means every single time you use a spike super on someone, they're dead. They're just so slow, there's no way that they can even escape it. This probably should be nerfed even more, but like 20%, maybe even 15%. And I still think this would be like an S tier mythic gear. It just works so well with Spike. I think without it, Spike would be pretty unusable right now, especially because he's already pretty bad in the meta since the damage nerf. Imagine if the mythic gear was nerfed as well, he'd be unusable. So that's going to be it for today's video, guys. You can see on the screen, this is my ranking. Again, let me know whether I got anything wrong. I think, again, a lot of these can be situational and still lock in the C tier. That doesn't mean those gears are like terrible. I actually use those mythic gears a lot of the time on my brawlers. It just means like there's probably better gears that get more value overall. And I still use some of the gears really in the D tier. The only gears I don't use in the game really is Sticky Oil and Exhausting Storm. So bear that in mind. Anyways, that's going to be it. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time.